Deep in the Cascade Mountains of Washington sits a place that almost nobody lives in anymore, a place where an entire community was erased overnight. This is Wellington, Washington, the site of one of the deadliest avalanches in American history. In early 1910, Wellington was a small railroad settlement along the Great Northern Railway, located near Stevens Pass. It was a critical stopping point for trains traveling through the mountains, but that winter brought one of the worst storms the region had ever seen. For days, massive snowfall trapped trains in the mountains. 2 trains, including the westbound Spokane Express, became stranded at Wellington while crews desperately tried to clear the tracks. But the snow kept coming, and the passengers and railroad workers were forced to wait inside the frozen wilderness. Then, on March 1st, 1910, after nearly a week of being trapped, disaster struck. A massive avalanche tore down the mountain and slammed into the stranded trains. The force of the snow pushed the locomotives and passenger cars hundreds of feet into the canyon below. 96 people were killed. Because of the remote location and dangerous conditions, rescuers struggled for days to even reach the wreckage and recover the victims. The tragedy changed the future of the area forever. After the disaster, the railroad eventually moved its route through a tunnel, avoiding the dangerous mountain pass. Wellington was renamed Ty, but the old town never truly recovered. Today, what remains is mostly abandoned. The forest has reclaimed the tracks, the buildings are gone, and only pieces of the old railroad history remain. But hidden in these mountains is the story of a town that vanished, not because of war, crime, or a mystery, but because nature itself proved unstoppable. Wellington became a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying places in America aren't created by people. They're created by forces we can't control. Next, we go to the mountains of southern Colorado, where there sits a place that looks almost forgotten today. There are no towering buildings, no bustling streets, no signs that thousands of people once lived here. But over a century ago, this quiet piece of land became the scene of one of the most shocking events in American history. This is Ludlow, Colorado, the site of the Ludlow Massacre. In the early 1900s, Ludlow was a coal mining town owned by the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, one of the largest coal companies in the United States. Thousands of workers, many of them immigrants from countries across Europe and Mexico, came to the area hoping to build a better life working in the mines. But life underground was extremely dangerous. Mining accidents were common, wages were low, and many workers lived in company-owned towns where the company controlled not only their jobs, but also their housing and daily lives. In 1913, miners across Colorado went on strike demanding better working conditions, higher wages, safer mines, and the right to organize a union. The strike quickly became one of the largest labor conflicts in American history. The Colorado Fuel and Iron Company refused to meet the miners' demands, and the situation escalated. Striking workers and their families were forced out of company housing, so many moved into tent colonies organized by the union. One of the largest of these camps was located near Ludlow. Hundreds of families lived there, including women and children, while tensions between the miners, the company, and the Colorado National Guard continued to rise. For months, the camp was surrounded by armed guards, and conflict became more frequent. Then, on April 20th, 1914, the situation turned deadly. A confrontation broke out between the Colorado National Guard and the striking miners at the Ludlow tent colony. Gunfire erupted, and the camp was eventually set on fire. When the flames finally died down, the true horror was discovered. Several miners had been killed, but among the victims were women and children who had been hiding beneath the tents in a makeshift underground shelter. In total, around 20 people died during the Ludlow Massacre, including at least 11 children. The deaths shocked the nation. Newspapers across the country reported on what happened at Ludlow, and public outrage grew over the treatment of striking workers and their families. The violence sparked further fighting throughout Colorado before the strike eventually ended. Although the miners did not immediately win all of their demands, the events at Ludlow became a turning point in the American labor movement. The tragedy helped bring national attention to the dangerous conditions workers faced and became a powerful symbol of the fight for workers' rights. Today, the town of Ludlow is mostly gone. A memorial now stands where the tent colony once existed, honoring the people who lost their lives there. But the land still carries the memory of what happened. Ludlow is a reminder that some of America's darkest places are not abandoned because people forgot about them. They're abandoned because history remembers exactly what happened there. A small mining town in Colorado became the battlefield between powerful companies, desperate workers, and a nation struggling to decide what kind of future it wanted. The last place we're exploring is different from the others. Wellington disappeared because of the power of nature. Ludlow became a symbol of violence between people fighting for survival. But this next location isn't remembered because of a disaster or a battle. It's remembered because of the evil that took place there. Hidden deep in the desert landscape of California's Death Valley region sits Barker Ranch, a remote and isolated place that became the final hideout of one of the most infamous criminals in American history, Charles Manson. In the late 1960s, Manson created a cult-like group known as the Manson family. He gathered a group of followers, many of them young people searching for meaning and belonging, and manipulated them through a combination of control, fear, and his strange ideology. The group eventually settled in remote locations away from normal society, including the Spahn Ranch near Los Angeles, and later Barker Ranch in the desert. Barker Ranch was owned by an elderly woman named Arlene Barker, who allowed Manson and his followers to stay there. The isolated location made it appealing to the group because it was far away from authorities and the outside world. But while the ranch looked like a peaceful escape, investigators would later discover it was connected to one of the most infamous crime stories in American history. In August 1969, members of the Manson family carried out a series of murders in Los Angeles, including the killings at the home of actress Sharon Tate and the murders of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. The crimes shocked the nation. As investigators worked to uncover who was responsible, evidence eventually led them back to Manson and his followers. After months of investigation, police raided Barker Ranch in October 1969. The raid was not originally intended to arrest Manson for the Tate-LaBianca murders. Authorities were investigating unrelated crimes involving stolen vehicles and vandalism. But during the operation, Manson and several of his followers were taken into custody. Investigators soon connected the group to the murders, and the world learned about the crimes that had been committed in Manson's name. The ranch became one of the final chapters in the story of the Manson family. Years later, Barker Ranch remains a place surrounded by a dark reputation. The buildings have mostly disappeared, and the desert has slowly reclaimed the area. But the location still draws visitors fascinated by the history surrounding it. Not because it was a battlefield, not because it was the site of a natural disaster, but because it was the place where one of America's most notorious criminals was finally captured. Today, Barker Ranch stands as a reminder of how dangerous manipulation and blind loyalty can become when placed in the hands of the wrong person. 3 locations, 3 different tragedies, a town buried beneath an avalanche, a community destroyed by conflict, and a desert hideout connected to one of the darkest criminal stories in American history. These places may look abandoned now, but their history is still alive.